where the conditions are understood, where the geography is known, where the life expectancy, where the birth rates, where the survivability of the species can be witnessed and determined. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. What purpose, gentleman from Idaho, rise?
Mr. Chairman, strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman, or as brief as I can. I appreciate this discussion on wolves because it is something that is near and dear to the people of Idaho. I was the Speaker of the House in Idaho when the gentleman from Washington supported wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone and Idaho and Montana and Wyoming, something that Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana frankly didn't want. But nevertheless, Fish and Wildlife Service said that's what we're going to do, and that's what they did. Since that time, Idaho and Montana and Wyoming have been doing the right thing in restoring these wolf populations. In Idaho and Montana, they came up with a wolf management plan that was approved by Fish and Wildlife Service. It was approved. But then it was taken to court because it didn't include Wyoming. And the judge said, not based on science, we're trying to get back to science. But a judge said, you can't just delist in Idaho and Montana, you have to include Wyoming, and Wyoming didn't have a state management plan approved then. Since that time, I understand that Fish and Wildlife Service and Wyoming have come up with a plan in principle, and they're still working out the detail, but I believe that they will have a plan by the end of this year to delist in Wyoming. All we're saying is that when they're delisted by Fish and Wildlife Service, they have an approved plan, then it is not subject to judicial review. Because frankly, there are people who don't think we ought to have any wolf management plan that would include, guess what, hunting wolves. I know the gentleman from Washington is astounded by that. Our governor has indicated that he likes to hunt wolves. The problem is wolves have no natural predator out there except hunger. When they've done away with the food supply, some wolves die. Otherwise, they just continue to grow in population. Anybody that thought we were going to reintroduce wolves into the Rocky Mountains and there wasn't going to be some type of control, a hunt or whatever, we're living on a different planet. But those same people now that wanted the wolves reintroduced, that oppose any type of wolf management, go to court to try to stop the delisting. The gentleman from Washington has explained the problem that exists when you have mixed management of wolves that get confused. They don't know which side of the line they live on, whether they're protected or whether they're not protected, whether they can go out and eat your puppy dog or not. So they're confused wolves. We're trying to clear that up for them. And in the Great Lakes have had a population that is greater than in the Rocky Mountains and have been deserving of delisting for a number of years but have just not got it done. And contrary to what the gentleman from Virginia said, I actually think the Secretary of Interior is doing a good job. There are many things I agree with him on. Many of my Westerners would disagree with that. I happen to think he's doing a good job as Secretary of Interior. I don't agree with everything he does. But you know what? When I call him up and say, we got some real problems with this, he listens. He might not agree after he listens, but he listens to us. And that's all I ask from a gentleman in that position. So don't believe that we are critical of the Secretary. We do have some differences of opinion, and I realize that he sometimes works in an administration that makes it difficult for him sometimes. He's from Colorado. He knows Western issues. But I've enjoyed working with him, and I trust the Fish and Wildlife Service and the science that they provide to delist wolves better than I do a judge. That's why this language is here. Wolves will still be protected in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Washington, Oregon, Utah, where they've expanded to, and in the Great Lakes.
The gentleman yield just briefly.
I'd be happy to yield.
As I recall, the fact was that Montana and Idaho had plans that would protect the wolves if they were delisted, and that at some point they would take further action if necessary to protect the wolves, if too many of them were killed.
Exactly.
Now, the problem with Wyoming was Wyoming's plan didn't have credibility. Now I understand that it does. But what the judge was saying is you have to protect the wolf throughout the area, which included Wyoming. That's why they couldn't delist it without dealing with Wyoming, and Wyoming wasn't ready. So I hope that Wyoming will come up with a credible plan at the state level to keep the wolf going.
Reclaiming my time, you're right. If wolf populations get below acceptable levels, then they go back on the endangered list. Guess what? Wyoming and Montana and Idaho is not going to let that happen.
Good.
So it is, I think this is a good way to go for proceeding with the Endangered Species Act and making sure it does what it's intended to do. Yield back.
Is there objection? Without objection, the gentleman from Idaho is
Happy to
recognized
yield.
for 2 additional
Happy to yield,
minutes.
gentleman from Washington.
I'd like to yield because this is precisely the point that this debate and discussion on Endangered Species Act is having. If you recall in the CR, the Endangered Species Act was amended to allow Idaho and Montana to delist, because the way ESA was written, unless the whole identified population could have been managed, nobody could manage. And that was the flaw, and that's what we've been saying why, you know, as we had last night, probably have other discussions on this, why ESA needs to be looked at in a comprehensive way, because it was clearly a flaw. It was clearly a flaw, and I'm glad that the CR amended the Endangered Species Act to take care of this provision. And the colloquy that we had regarding Washington, Oregon, and Utah was simply to recognize these larger populations, but recognize states are moving in a direction of managing their populations. Now, I yield back to my friend.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I would just say to the gentleman from Washington, that was supportive of reintroduction of wolves in Idaho and Montana and Wyoming that put us in this situation. Several wolves.
I want to say to the chairman, if you'd yield, I also tried to reintroduce the wolf in western Washington, but the chairman of the Interior Committee and the other body disagreed with me.
Reclaiming my time, western Washington. I just want you to know that there have been several wolves that have come to my house. And they presented me with a petition that they would like to visit the Cascades.
And we'd like to have them.
You're welcome.
Real quickly,
I'd be happy.
as a matter of fact, the gray wolves are showing up in the Cascades now, eastern side of the Cascades, so you'll get them. I yield back.
Yield back to bounce my time.
The Olympics, too.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Washington.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 16 of Rule 18, pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Dix, will be postponed. Clerk will read.
Page 60, line 6, trailing livestock over public land.
Mr. Chairman.
Section 120.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Dix of Washington. Page 60, beginning on line 6, strike Section 120.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Section 120 provides that for 2012 through 2014, the movement of livestock across public lands shall not be subject to NEPA review. Proponents of this provision will argue that moving cattle from one location to another shouldn't require a NEPA review. However, this movement of cattle can be across wide swatches of public lands and take weeks, not just days. The impact on water, plant, and other wildlife species, including bighorn sheep, can be significant. So I would like to yield to the ranking member to further discuss this amendment.
I thank the gentleman. Some on the other side may be thinking, well, what's a guy from a heavily residential suburban area in the Washington area with no cattle in this district? No. So I would have thought this would have been a perfectly fine amendment. What do you need to have restrictions for livestock, moving from one place to another? But upon a further investigation, what is not immediately apparent becomes very important. as the gentleman has said, we're talking about very wide swaths of land that are covered by these livestock movements. And they don't just take, you know, a few hours or a few days. Sometimes they can take weeks. And when you've got very large herds of cattle, you can cause quite some destruction to the soil, to the brush, to waterways, to any number of environmental resources in the process of major transfers from one area to another of very large herds of cattle. So there can be very substantial environmental destruction. That's why those who are involved in this feel there ought to be some appeal to the judicial system to, if you're going to do this, and the only way we have really is to have a NEPA review. The National Environmental Policy Act will review it. They'll tell us what the ramifications will be, what are the consequences, and then based upon that information, it empowers those who have land or interests that would be adversely affected by large movements of cattle from one place to another. So that's why the NEPA review has an appropriate place and role to play in this. And that's why I think the gentleman's amendment makes a lot of sense, and I would support it.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back. Gentleman from Idaho.
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, referring my remarks to the chairman, I got to get the gentleman from Virginia on a horse out with some cattle. Madam Chairman, I rise in opposition to this amendment. Trailing is the process of moving a livestock herd from one grazing area to another. It generally doesn't take weeks. It certainly doesn't take weeks in the same location. You are moving from one location to another. Trailing has no significant impact on the environment, so while in the past it has been generally considered, part of the process of grazing on public lands, and the BLM has rarely conducted environmental assessments on or issued permits for trailing itself, focusing instead on the impacts of grazing. Recently, and this is the problem, and this is why this amendment is before us. Recently, environmental activists that want to get cattle off of public lands, and they have a right to try to do this. I disagree with them. But they have focused their attention on trailing as a way to shut down grazing on public lands. Congress, not the courts, has the authority to determine public land policies, and today responsible grazing is an important and legitimate use of public lands. Unfortunately, because the activists have tied local BLM offices up in knots with litigation, judges are now determining how public lands can be used in the West. This provision, and this is the important part, this provision attempts to get ahead of this issue by exempting trailing from NEPA requirements for 2011 through 2014. I hope the gentleman's listening. This exempts the trailing requirements for 2011 through 2014. The Forest Service, on their grazing permits, require permits on trailing. The Forest Service does. The BLM has not in the past. But instead, these litigations are tying this up in knots. The BLM is going through a process to include trailing when they issue their grazing permits, so that it will be, the NEPA process on trailing will be included. The problem is between now and when they get that completed, we're going to be in court, spending all our money in court rather than getting this process moving forward. We're not opposed to requiring NEPA process on trailing permits just like the Forest Service does, but what this does is exempt us through 2014 while BLM, for lack of a better term, gets their act together. That's all this does. Yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Wyoming rise?
I move to strike the last word, Mr.
Gentlelady is
Chairman.
recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise to oppose the amendment as well, Mr. Chairman. There's a gentleman who is a wildlife biologist by the name of Alan Savory, and Alan Savory studied the way that buffalo grazed on the sweeping landscapes of the American West. And buffalo grazed in a manner that cut wide swaths of concentrated numbers of buffalo that would move through and graze literally everything down to the nubs, both the weeds, the buffalo grass, and all of the very nutritious hard grasses and the grasses of the sandhills of Nebraska, very different, very nutritious grasses that we call hard grasses, some short hard grass and others the tall grass. But they'd take everything out, and they would at the same time, through their split hooves, knead the soil in a way that allowed those lands to regrow more healthy, stronger, more filled in than they were prior to this intensive short-term grazing. That's how buffalo grazed the plains of the United States before people were here. So Alan Savory took those same practices to Rhodesia and studied the manner in which grazing occurred there and created something called the Savory system. The Savory grazing system is now used in a number of places throughout the West, and it actually emulates the way that buffalo grazed. And that is what happens when you trail cattle and sheep across public lands in a manner which keeps them concentrated for very short periods of time, where they do very intensive grazing for very short periods of time and then get off that land quickly so that grass can regenerate, so you don't have the type of runoff that happens when you have some charismatic megafauna overgrazing repeatedly day after day after day in the same place. That's why these grazing practices are appropriate, these trailing practices are appropriate, and actually create a healthier grazing situation that carries a long-term, sturdier, stronger, healthier grass resource to be used by wildlife and domestic animals. That is why, on a scientific basis, there is great rationale for relieving people who trail livestock across public lands from the onerous, expensive obligations of the NEPA process. I appeal to the desire to use sound science in the manner in which we approach these issues, and not the type of emotional arguments that are raised by people who are just philosophically opposed to grazing. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Dix. Those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Aye. Opposed will say no. No. Being the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from Washington?
I'm waiting for the...
The independent chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Clerk will read.
Page 60, line 15. Bomer reporting requirements,
Mr.
Section
Chairman,
121.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Dix of Washington, page 60, beginning on line 15, strike Section 121.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Section 121 requires the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation, and Enforcement to keep detailed records and provide quarterly reports on any oil and gas permit or plan that was not approved by the agency. They don't ask for the ones that were approved, just the ones that were not approved. This is the majority's attempt to try to speed up the approval of oil, gas permits and plans, and I have no objection to that. Here we are 16 months after Deepwater Horizon, and the Congress hasn't enacted a single significant safety reform. Despite the serious safety and environmental shortcomings found as a result of the Deepwater Horizon tragedy, the majority wants BOEMRE to return to the good old days of lax reviews and quick approval of oil and gas permits and plans. I think this amendment should be stricken, and I yield to the ranking member for his comments on this amendment and this provision.
Well, I thank the gentleman. Not surprisingly, I fully agree with the gentleman that this language, again, is inappropriate in here. It's punitive. It requires excessive record keeping, and ironically, because normally we're getting complaints that this is requiring too much record keeping. Well, now what we do is requiring in this bill even more detailed records that are not now required. It's going to expand the bureaucracy. They have to provide quarterly reports on any oil and gas permit or plan that wasn't approved by the agency. So in other words, the intention is to discourage the agency from not approving anything, even if they feel that the oil and gas drilling operation might not be a safe one, that they don't have the requisite rules in place to prevent a Deepwater Horizon tragedy. It says for each such document that the Bureau receives, they have to have the date the document was returned to the applicant, the date the document is treated by the Bureau, the date of final agency action by the document, and on and on. More and more records that are not necessary. We know what the intent of this is. It's to tell BOMER, the new Ocean Energy Management Agency, it's in your interest, just speed these along. Don't hold up any of these permits, because if you do, you're going to have this very burdensome requirement on you. Here, it's 16 months after Deepwater Horizon, and the Congress hasn't enacted a single significant safety reform, and the majority wants us to return to the good old days of very lax reviews, quick approvals of every oil and gas permit and plan. And if you don't, then we're going to impose this burdensome requirement upon BOMER. And, that's just not in the interests of safety. It works against our resolve not to let a Deepwater Horizon tragedy occur again. I'm using this acronym BOMER. It's, for those who don't know what it means, it's the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation, and Enforcement. It's the new agency that was set up to prevent any future Deepwater Horizon tragedies. So here we are, language that is intended to mitigate against BOMER being able to do its job. So I strongly support the intention of the ranking member of the full committee in striking this burdensome language.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Jimmy yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
I move to strike the last word in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if a little green man from outer space came and landed and watches this debate, they'd be puzzled. And if the gentleman on the other side were so concerned about the Culberson Amendment, I'm puzzled why they didn't request a recorded vote in the committee. This was adopted in the committee, the full committee markup, by a voice vote. But then beyond that, nobody wants another Deepwater Horizon, but this language that the gentlemen are objecting to says that this new agency will report quarterly to Congress on the status of permitting and why permits were rejected. Now, why would the gentleman not want to have transparency and oversight over an agency to which we appropriate dollars? Now, this wouldn't puzzle me if we just hadn't come off of 4 years of a majority that was preaching to us about transparency and oversight and openness. Why wouldn't you want some report issued by the agency that tells you what they're doing with the money that we appropriate to them and what's the status and why a permit was rejected? That's a reasonable question. And just to move to a different agency, I have you may not know this, Mr. Moran, and I've been interested to know that I lived in Mr. Moran's district for a period of time when I'm here in Washington, D.C. I never saw anybody grazing, and I never saw anybody moving livestock. But in my area, I will tell you that we're the nursery capital of the world. and we are very much concerned with the guest worker program. And under this administration, applications for guest worker applications have been denied at an alarming rate. But when we ask the Department of Labor how many have been denied and how many have been appealed and how many appeals have been successful, they keep those records. You know why? Because that's a reasonable inquiry by a member of Congress, a member of the public, a guy who's growing arborvitae in Perry, Ohio. And so to describe this as somehow burdensome and crippling and somehow going to lead to another Horizon Deepwater disaster, it's just ridiculous. Now, you guys, excuse me, the guys on the other side, Mr. Chairman, are great members and great advocates for a lot of things. But this argument doesn't even pass the straight face test, and I would respectfully urge that it be defeated.
If the, would the gentleman...
I'd love to yield to my former congressman, sure.
Well, thank you, because you had this, this deep-seated concern, I know, about why we did not ask for a vote. I can clarify that.
Good.
The reason is we were overwhelmed with more than 40 amendments.
Right.
And we were trying to look to the welfare of the rest of the committee. I mean, there's only so many of these issues that you can call a recorded vote on. Well, so we tried to be reasonable.
Reclaiming my time, and
the gentleman yield to me.
Just a second. I can appreciate the pressure that the gentleman found himself under. There are over 200 amendments. We're approaching 200 amendments on this particular piece of legislation. And I recall sitting in another full committee markup where the gentleman asked for a recorded vote on whether or not we could use styrofoam containers in the House cafeteria. So clearly, the gentleman has to be as concerned about knowing what it is this new agency is doing relative to permits as he is about styrofoam containers in the cafeteria. Happy to yield to the gentleman.
You know, this year, I'm sure the gentleman has noticed, we've been trying to reestablish regular order. Right. Having a subcommittee markup and a full committee markup and amendments on the floor, which is welcomed by our side. So we have to kind of make a decision. Are we going to ask for a vote on every single issue? We never do that. We try to cooperate. This is comedy, something that the gentleman from Ohio understands quite well. So I would just remind him that we're trying to get through these bills, and that that's why we try to not ask for a vote on everything. And we wanted to save this one for the floor so the American people would hear about what's going on.
Just reclaiming my time, I appreciate it, and I know the gentleman said comedy, not comedy. But I think that it's comedy. I think it's comedy with a D that reigns here, and I trust that the gentleman has had his tongue firmly implanted in his cheek as he made that observation. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose, gentleman from Louisiana, rise?
To strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hail from Louisiana, which, of course, is a very big part of what this Section 121 is about, and certainly what the amendment is about. Just bringing everyone back, we had the Deep Horizon spill, which was a tragic situation which has hurt Louisiana in several ways, one being, of course, oil in the water, that's obvious, but then, of course, the many jobs that have been lost. But, you know, going back over history, what we found is that in response to this, the President brought together 10 experts to determine whether or not drilling should be stopped in deep water off the shores of Louisiana, in the Gulf of Mexico, in fact. This board of experts came together and said, no, that should not happen. We should continue forward. We can solve this problem. We can prevent it from happening. Nonetheless, the President came out and said, no, let's shut down drilling. Well, when that didn't work, the President slapped a moratorium in Secretary Salazar on drilling. Then there was lawsuits. Then we had a de facto moratorium. Then we had a permatorium after there was a stay placed by a judge. And today we have what I would call a slowatorium on permits and leasing in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's very clear what's going on is the fact that even though the administration can't get the courts to stop drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, Even though the other side can advance legislation, they're trying to do it administratively by slowing the process down. So all we ask the people of Louisiana is some transparency in this issue. And this Section 121 does some very simple things. It just says the Secretary of the Interior shall log and track the specific reasons for BOMR returning to an applicant without approval any exploration plan, development and production plan, development operations, coordination document, or application, etc., etc. We're getting reports continuously from drillers, from contractors who are out there trying to drill, that they put in applications, weeks, months go by, they hear nothing. Finally they get it back and an I was not dotted. So now they got to start the process over again. And so all we're asking is that integrity be brought back into this process, that there be accountability back into this process, and the gentleman is absolutely right. We do want to get drilling back up in the Gulf of Mexico. We were at a peak of 1.7 million barrels a day before this incident. It has dropped now to 1.59 million barrels a day, and it's going to continue to drop because we have a process in which permits and leasing are still way off track. They're not back to the levels they were, and production is going to net down, and as a result of that, we're going to continue to see oil and gas prices going up. So despite what is coming out of the Secretary of Interior, drilling and production is not up, it's down. And it's continuing down and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future until we get the permits and the leases back up. So I certainly suggest, Mr. Chairman, that my colleagues and I should oppose this amendment. We do need to have transparency and accountability in BOMR when it comes to offshore drilling.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will.
I'd just like to put on the record, the gentleman's quite right. There are now 1.6 million barrels per day being drilled, but to date 67 new shallow water well permits have been issued since the implementation of these new standards, and they're averaging 6 per month. The average before the disaster had been 8, so they're catching up. Just 3 of these permits are currently pending. The 8 have asked for more information, have not been denied. In terms of Deepwater, 75 permits have been issued, and there are 25 pending, 22 have been asked for additional information. And mostly that information is with regard to containment, which is exactly what we instructed the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to do. Are they sure? Can they assure us that they can contain any spill? So, you know, things are not quite as dire as you might believe, and I suspect
reclaiming my time briefly, yeah. I would just suggest that we're still well off pace, and accountability is not going to be a factor in that issue.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
To strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, in the 7 months before the blowout, there were 49 Deepwater permits issued, and in the 7 months since the moratorium was allegedly lifted, there's only been 7 Deepwater permits issued, and we in the committee adopted this amendment, which I was proud to offer, simply to shine sunlight on the process. All the language in this bill requires is that the agency report to the American people and report to Congress the reasons why a permit for exploration or for drilling has been slowed down or delayed. We're all committed to transparency. We all want to know why, where and how our tax dollars are being spent, and the slowdown in drilling in the Gulf of Mexico has had a catastrophic effect on employment. We've lost just since 2008, over 60,000 jobs have been lost in the Gulf of Mexico area, and if we would get back to the levels of drilling, of permitting, both shallow and deep water, that we were before the blowout, it's estimated that as many as 190,000 jobs could be created in the Gulf of Mexico in about 18 months, with about 400,000 industry-supported jobs across the United States, supplying equipment, to the offshore oil industry, and no one has a stronger stake in protecting the environment than all of us who live there. These folks that work for these great companies are my friends and my neighbors. I'm proud to represent so many of these companies. Houston, Texas is to the oil industry what Silicon Valley is to the computer industry, and these are engineers, these are scientists, these are people who live and work in and around the Gulf of Mexico, who fish there, whose kids play on the beaches. And we have, being a native Houstonian and growing up in the Gulf, I remember there were tar balls were common on the beach in Galveston. You just don't see it anymore.
Well,
so yes, sir, I certainly will.
Well, I just wanted to say to the gentleman, with the gentleman I've worked together, I have great regard for him. I just wanted to mention a couple facts, and if we take time, I'll try to get you extra time. To date, 67 new shallow water well permits have been issued since the implementation of new safety and environmental standards on June 8, 2010. Permits have averaged more than 6 per month over the last 8 months, compared to an average of 8 per month in 2009. Just 3 of these permits are currently pending, with 8 having been returned to the operator for more information. Now, the question I have is, why don't we ask them to give when they're doing the report, not just on the ones that they've turned down, but the ones that they've approved? I mean, wouldn't the gentleman want to have all that information instead of just the negative side of this?
Well, the permits that have been approved, of course, that's a matter of public record, but the permits that have been rejected that are not yet a matter of public record, we want to see those and know why they've been rejected, why have they been delayed. That's all this language requires, is that they shine sunlight in every corner of the process. And for many of these permits, have been rejected for reasons that are not directly tied to the substance of the application. I've seen permits that are rejected because the typeface wasn't, in the opinion of the permitter, correct. And it is clear that there's been a slowdown, that this administration overreacted to the spill and has deliberately slowed down the permitting process and has made it more difficult for Americans to find American oil and gas. And we're committed to drill here and drill now in a way that is safe and clean, that protects the environment, but yet takes advantage of the natural resources that God has so abundantly blessed this continent with. And we have in the Gulf of Mexico demonstrated that it can be done cleanly and safely, and there's no quicker way to generate high-paying jobs than to open up drilling in the continental United States, and particularly in the Gulf of Mexico. Those rigs are gone, by the way, Mr. Dix. Once those rigs leave the Gulf of Mexico, they don't come back. And I'd be happy to yield to my friend from Ohio.
The greatest deliberative body in the world is sometimes during the course of a very intelligent discussion, the truth and facts come out. Now, both the gentleman from Washington and the gentleman from Virginia have been able to cite chapter and verse of how many applications have been applied for, where they are, what's happened to them. And so to suggest that somehow this is going to create some additional burden, you've got to add a line. We denied it because. So I trust that based upon the sunshine that has now been brought forth to the good facts by the distinguished ranking member, perhaps we can get past this amendment without a recorded vote as we did in the committee in the interest of comedy. And I yield back to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio and urge the House to defeat this amendment because, again, all the language in the bill requires. I'd be happy to yield to my friend from Washington.
Now we get to Deepwater. Since an applicant first successfully demonstrated containment capabilities in mid-February of this year, BOMER has approved 75 permits for 21 unique wells, with 25 permits pending and 22 permits returned to the operator with requests for additional information. I ask the gentleman have 1 additional minute.
Is there objection? That objection, gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 additional minute.
If the gentleman continue, particularly information regarding containment. Now, we want them to do this safely. The gentleman, we don't want to go through what we went through on this, one of the greatest disasters in the history of the country. But I just hope that we can have reports that not only about the ones that are turned back, but as you say, maybe the other ones are part of the public record. But I think the report should come back with both of these. If it's going to come to the Congress, you know how this place works. I mean, not everybody sees these public records. If these reports are going to be used by the committee, we ought to have both sides of the equation.
I couldn't agree more, and we find ourselves in agreement that sunshine is a healthy thing, and that's the purpose of the language in the bill. And with all due respect, Mr. Dix, it is important that the House reject this amendment so we can have sunlight in every corner of the permitting process, and the public and the Congress can know why these permits have been delayed or denied, so we can open up the Gulf of Mexico to drill here and drill now cleanly and safely. and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida rise?
Strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I feel, I guess, like a lot of Americans, I just can't act like business as usual. I'm very upset that the FAA is shut down. And let me just tell everyone that House Bill 2644 by Costello was filed yesterday. It is a clean reauthorization of the FAA bill. Saturday morning at midnight, following 20 previous clean extensions, funding for the Federal Aviation Administration was allowed to expire. Why did this happen? Simply because the Republican Party, lack of leadership over the debt ceiling debate, is the same as this position with FAA. But over 4,000 people have been laid off and over 3,000 in Florida. Good construction jobs. Just last night, I spoke with a single mother from Kansas who had to give 2 children eviction notice to her apartment because she's not going to be able to pay her bill because of this impasse. These are real people. And I repeat, the reason that the FAA extension have not been renewed is because the House Transportation Committee chairman inserted language in the FAA bill extending the bill that would end the program that provides rural area airport subsidies. So yes, this is another example of the Republican Party. If you don't do it my way, then we'll just shut it down. Shut it down. But let me be clear. There are people here in the Capitol that flew up and they paid, let's say, $500 for their ticket. Well, the aviation still charged the $500, but the money that goes to fix up the airport, that money is going now to the airline industry. And in fact, they have raised the ticket price. So this is an example that we don't do our job, the people get hurt. And that goes back to what everybody is so nervous about as far as what we should do about raising the tax debt ceiling. I spoke to the longshoremen on Monday and I asked them, have you ever heard of it before? Not one person. Well, did you know I voted for it 7 times under President Bush? They didn't know that. 4 times under President Clinton and 19 times under Ronald Reagan. But yet, we've got people that will bring down the United States government if they don't have their way. It's our way or not at all. You know, I was here under President Bush when we had 8 years of what I call reverse Robin Hood, robbing from the poor and working people to give tax breaks to the rich. We did the same thing in December. $70 billion we gave. $70 billion to the millionaires and billionaires, and now people are calling my office wanting to know whether or not they're going to get their Social Security check. It's something wrong with that. It is something wrong in the people's house that we are having seniors and senior citizens worrying about whether they're going to get their Social Security check or whether they're going to get their veterans check, but yet we can't include the billionaires and millionaires. And we got people over here from Louisiana that we've given billions of dollars, but yet we want to close the opportunities to help other areas when we have disasters. Well, you know, that's what a budget is about. The budget determines your priorities. And it's a sad day in the people's house that we have people in this house that do not care about the American people. They only care about the next election. Well, I can truly say that you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. And so the people that have lost their jobs at the FAA because of politics, wake up. The people who think that it's okay to rob Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, wake up. Education, you know, elections have consequences. And we are going to have another election. And the people that we're going to move forward or move behind. And clearly we got people in charge that's only interested in pushing us behind. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Florida yields back her time. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Louisiana.
I move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
I find it very amusing that the gentleman from Virginia and the gentleman from Washington would use an argument that we are overburdening a federal agency when it is that side of the aisle that has a tendency to overburden and overregulate and demand reporting from our private sector. They have no problem asking the private sector to report things to the government so that they can discern whether or not the private sector is conducting its business accordingly. And when this amendment comes up and we're simply asking for transparency in order to see whether or not my constituents are being disingenuous or whether it is the government that is being disingenuous in the permitting process. That is simply all we're asking here. This allows us to help separate fact from fiction as to whether or not BOMA is rejecting permits for ridiculous reasons or legitimate reasons. And so, again, it just amazes me that when we have an opportunity to shed a little light on a federal agency, that the party who has claimed that it's all about transparency and open government is now trying to shield that agency. And so, therefore, Mr. Chairman, I believe this amendment should fail.
Back is time.
I yield back.
The question is on the amendment from the gentleman from Washington. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Clerk will read.
Page 61, line 18, lease authorization, section 122. The Secretary may lease to the Savannah Bar Pilots Association no more than 30,000 square feet of land within Fort Pulaski National Monument. Self-Determination Demonstration Project, Section 123. The Director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs shall reinstate the demonstration project for the Indian tribes within the California Tribal Trust Reform Consortium. Wildlands Funding Prohibition, Section 124. None of the funds may be used to implement Secretarial Order Number 3310, issued by the Secretary of the Interior on December 22, 2010.
What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise with an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Moran of Virginia, page 64, beginning on line 15, strike section 124.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as the amendment states, I seek to strike section 124 of this bill because section 124 prohibits expenditures for the Bureau of Land Management to carry out its lawful duties under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976. Now, Secretary Salazar issued an order appropriately. It was called 3310, and it stated a policy that BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, should act consistently with the law. Section 201 of the law, the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, requires that the Interior Department maintain a current inventory of land under its jurisdiction, and that it identify within that inventory of land the resource values, including wildernesses, of those lands. Now, Section 101 of the Federal Land Policy Act also says that certain public lands should be maintained in their natural state, and I quote. Now, that's the law. It's a law since 1976. Secretary Salazar is simply attempting to implement that law. Now, Despite what some have claimed, Secretary Salazar's order does not create any de facto wilderness. The reason that I would strike Section 124 is that it will then return BLM wilderness policy to the way that it has operated for 27 years, until it was unilaterally changed by then Interior Secretary Gail Norton in 2003 in the Bush administration. Now, the order that Secretary Salazar has issued directs BLM to develop recommendations to the Congress regarding wilderness land designations, and it directs public involvement in the development of those recommendations. Now, what could be wrong with that? Make recommendations to the Congress and have public involvement. But Section 124 of this bill removes the requirement for public involvement. Why are we afraid of public involvement? And it also removes the requirement for the Bureau of Land Management to provide recommendations to the Congress. Now, why does this bill want to prevent the Secretary of the Interior from making recommendations to the Congress and for having public involvement? Now, it's not going to prevent the Congress from designating wilderness. What it does do is to prevent the Congress from being properly informed before we can consider those designations. So the Secretary's order is the kind of good government process that encourages public involvement and forward thinking. As a demonstration of that forward thinking, Secretary Salazar reached out to the Congress in June, just a short while ago, and asked for members' input into the wilderness characteristics of lands within their districts. Isn't that what we want him to do? Reach out to the Congress, ask for our input. I don't know what more we can ask from the Secretary or from the Bureau of Land Management, but an open, public process with congressional input. But this section that I think should be struck, this Section 124, wants to foreclose that process, foreclose that open, public process with recommendations to the Congress. Now, it was a process that the majority in the committee report applauded. Now, let me say further that wildlands do have real benefits. They have economic, they have environmental, and they have aesthetic benefits. It's important that we protect not only public land in its natural state, but that we protect our ability to make informed decisions about which areas should or should not be designated as wilderness areas. I do think we need the secretarial order so that we can be informed, so that we can make the right decisions with regard to those designations. Wilderness areas are important, but it's also important that we maintain our responsibility, that the Secretary makes recommendations to us, for us to make the designation, and that it be a public process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
What purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Strike the last word.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate very kindly the gentleman from Virginia and his explanation of this particular provision that's in the bill. Unfortunately, it's not quite that way. Your recommendation of this is that in June the Secretary asked for our input as to wilderness, which is indeed exactly what he should do if he wants to obey the law. That is the proper course. Only Congress has the ability to designate wilderness areas. You said that the provision that's in the bill would foreclose that process. In fact, you're arguing the exact opposite. This provision in the bill does not allow the Secretary to go around that process, but insists that he does come and work with Congress to do any kind of land designation as it is written in the law. Secretary Salazar and Deputy Secretary Hayes and BLM Director Abbey have all assured us that they have no plans to implement this ill-advised policy they established just before Christmas, a secretarial order that usurped congressional authority and congressional responsibility. Now, I'm going to take them at their word. Unfortunately, though, the order has never been withdrawn officially. It has been superseded. A promised Solicitor General's opinion to clarify the legal status of that superseding of the opinion has been promised us. It was promised to the chairman, promised the chairman of the authorizing committee. Yesterday at a hearing, we asked where that was, and we were told once again, well, it's on its way. What was said at that hearing, obviously, is what they will do is nothing contrary to the provision that was placed in the CR. Therefore, if we're going to take their word for it, in the old Reagan-esque form, trust but verify, continue this language in here and make sure that what they claim they will do will be done, and there is no legal way of getting around it. Now, I say that legal process for a purpose. Even if I trust the word of the Secretary, and I do, if this provision is in some way legally in doubt, and once again, until the Solicitor General's opinion is clear with us, it is in doubt, in a litigation-prone society like we have, any kind of radical activist may ask a renegade judge for political purposes to countervene what the policy state is supposed to be. That's why I support Congressman Loomis's inclusion of this language in here. It would oppose any kind of roundabout process of going around Congress and allowing the administration to go around NEPA and around FLTMA, which is actually what the original order did. It is not that we don't have confidence in this process. It's simply that we want to make sure it is very clean. And if indeed we all agree and believe what the Secretary was saying, then this language in here has no impact whatsoever. It should be accepted by all of us. If, though, you want to try and have some kind of dangling aspect out there so that somebody can sue someone somewhere and maybe change the entire process, then create doubt and actually withdraw language that was in the CR that was approved by the House and the Senate and signed by the President. What we're asking for is consistency, so that what the gentleman from Virginia said will indeed happen, that if wilderness is designated, it will be done by Congress. It is our legal responsibility to do it. And that no one can do these evaluations, which are legal under FLTMA, with only one criteria. That, once again, was admitted by Director Abbey in our committee, that is not the way the law is written, and indeed, if you do that, that is an abrogation of the law. Now, once again, you have a process here. If you leave the language in there, it's no harm, no foul. It is consistent with the law, and it is consistent with what the Department of Interior said their policy will be. You take this language out, and all of a sudden, you have created a doubt. Find somebody who has a good attorney, and all of a sudden that doubt creates a major problem for the Department of Interior and especially for us in Congress. Thank you, and I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
The gentleman yields back his time. Who seeks recognition? What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
To strike the last word.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
The amendment that's being offered is perfectly appropriate. It's the duty of the Department of Interior to carry out the law. And the law requires the Secretary to review from time to time the status of public land. All too often I hear my colleagues on the Republican side say that this is government land. No, no, no. This is not government land. This is our land. This is the land of the American people, owned in common for the common good. And the Secretary, carrying out that responsibility, reviews the attributes of the land. Is it good for oil? How about gas development or coal development? Or maybe it's useful as grazing land. Or perhaps it should be wild and scenic land and preserved for that purpose of remaining in its most natural state. So, my Republican colleagues come up and say, no, you can't look at the land. You can't study the land. We just won't want to know anything about the land. except to allow for the destruction of the land. This particular amendment doesn't come in a vacuum. This amendment follows, or actually leads, to the House floor another bill that is likely to move out of the Resources Committee and soon be on the floor, which would take the previous work done over the last 30 years that would quantify the values of the land, scenic, natural, wilderness, and push all of that aside and say, open all the land, to what was euphemistically, I hope euphemistically, called mechanized conservation. Mechanized conservation. Sounds to me like bulldozers, drilling rigs, stampede of cattle, and the like over any and all land. Understand that this particular line in this appropriation bill goes hand in hand with a piece of legislation that went through, that was heard in the Resources Committee just yesterday, that would take all of the land that has been designated as wild and scenic some 30 years ago, some of which has said, no, it's not perfect for a wild and scenic designation, and take all of that land and open it for development. We ought not do that. And therefore, this amendment that's been brought forward by the ranking member is appropriate in that it allows the Department of Interior to upgrade some 30-year-old studies, taking into account new scientific information, new information about the land, and making that information available to us in Congress so that we can make an informed decision about whether land should or should not be wild and scenic or whatever designation might be appropriate, including opening some land for development. But I suppose it's best to know nothing. I would love to yield briefly, and if I don't have enough time to respond, perhaps you could yield to me.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. I think that I understand the gentleman's